still trying to join, but very much appreciate everyone participating today. I do believe the governor is going to be a few minutes late, and so when he will kind of just proceed through the agenda, and when he joins us, we'll have him provide obviously some comments, and hopefully, as he's able to stay on, can participate in some of the other conversations. So I am looking on my participants, and I don't see Dr. Adipur as well on here. I don't think so. She's another guest that I haven't yet seen, so on the list. So, but anyway, I'd maybe start with the best news of the day for you. We don't plan to have a meeting next Monday on Memorial Day, and we will resume the following week after that. I for right now, and I'll have to double check with the governor and the approach that we'll use kind of going forward. But for the time being, I anticipate we'll kind of maintain a weekly update as long as that seems a viable thing to do for everyone, and we'll continue down that path. But so again, just let you know, we won't have this meeting on next Monday, which will be Memorial Day. So we'll go ahead and kind of skip by the comments by the governor and on kind of to some things that I anticipate for the week ahead, and some topics that I think we're likely to hear more about. And I wanted to highlight these for you, trying to be ahead of them as best possible. That we're really looking to put some guidance out on summer learning and the direction that we believe we'll be able to go. At a very high level, I have had conversations with the governor's office about potentially using June 8th as a date with a basic frame that would at least mirror some of the childcare guidance, the numbers of students that could be in schools, kind of the other things that are there. But we've also had a team working at the department as well as with DHHS to review kind of what those practices may look like, what the approaches would be. One thing I want to highlight, this does not mandate that you create those in-person environments, but I know many of you have been looking for ways to be able to proceed, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we'll kind of continue that process as this meeting continues. Also, summer graduation is one of the things that I think that we'll talk about. In fact, Jack Moles and probably maybe even Dr. Poor, if she's on, will be able to kind of talk about some of that effort. I do hope to have an announcement again out by Friday. We've had everything from proposals around some of our larger districts, looking at using a large arena and what that potentially could look like, and certainly kind of in-person graduations in outside environments, which I think is kind of the preferred environment, as at least as I've understood it. But again, hope to have some of that out by the end of the week. And then our CARES Act application should be placed or submitted, I guess, later at the end of the week is our intention, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So those are kind of three big themes that I anticipate we'll have some public dialogue about later in the week. And again, we'll have more dialogue on these in the meeting here today. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So I think we'll dive. Oh, here's Dr. Poor too. So we're going to dive into the Launch Nebraska and a little bit of the themes that we see here through Launch Nebraska. I'm going to invite Jack Moles and Craig Lofquist to kind of chat with me as we go through this. But I wanted to highlight, I know it's not the only thing going on. In fact, we have different regions of the state. I think MOAC in the Omaha area is doing some work. I know I've talked to some other superintendents about kind of gathering up with kind of peer type schools around how they can start to do some of their joint planning. And of course, all along we've had regional discussions at an ESU level as well. But I want to kind of turn it over to Jack. I know we've talked graduation, and I think NERCS is also working with a group of quite a group of schools on fall planning as well, and wanted to talk through that just a little bit with you, Jack. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah. Last week we had a series of meetings. On Wednesday, I had 3 meetings just to talk about graduations and directions we might be able to go. And on those meetings, I had over 60 school districts represented on that discussion alone in the 3 meetings. And from that, we put together a committee that kind of worked on pushing some recommendations to you, I guess, to the state to say, you know, here's some things we think could work. We modeled them very much after the guidelines for the conduct of faith-based services that came out earlier. Now we did that work, and now we're going to turn to looking at the idea of reopening. And we had a series of discussions on that last Thursday and Friday. And from that was kind of decided we'd kind of divide things up and kind of divide and conquer on different themes. And we've identified about 7 or 8 themes that we're going to center some committees around. I put out a call this morning for volunteers to serve on committees. And right now, I put that out at, I don't know what time it was, about 11:30 or so. Right now, I've had well over 70 superintendents say they want in. They want to be part of committees. They're volunteering for committees. So we're going to start that work pretty quick. And with that, what we'd like to offer up to you, Commissioner, and your people, if there are any specific discussions you want us to have, let us know, and we'll have those discussions, get the information back to you. We'll keep you apprised as to what we're talking about as we move along. So any way we can help you on the state level, let us know.
Yeah, no, and that's great. And I do appreciate it. I think it's probably been about 3 weeks ago or so when Jack and I, maybe even 4 weeks ago, had conversations about kind of using kind of NERCS schools and like-sized schools to have some conversations. And I appreciate that effort, Jack, and by your membership as well. You know, one thing I would highlight and kind of transition, and I'll cue up here Craig in a little bit too, but one thing I want to highlight, you know, this is really still going to fall back on local leadership to kind of maneuver through this. And I see Lane Carr's on, and Lane, you're welcome to say anything here, but the reality is it's going to take that kind of local level conditions and understanding of that. And what we plan to do with Launch Nebraska is try to help provide guidance, vet things at scale where we can vet them, you know, work with UNMC to kind of take another look at, you know, plans and ideas, work with Dr. Poor, who's on here, to kind of vet ideas around what's safe, and work with all of our local public health officials and do that at some scale. So I really do appreciate what NERCS has been doing. I appreciate what the ESUs have been doing as well in kind of helping us scale up the conversations. I mean, it's, you know, it's been among the most complex things you could imagine for thinking about rules and regs in the spring. Well, it gets even more complex in planning, I think, for re-entering certainly into the fall, and even in the summer, using that time most effectively. And so I bring Craig on for a little bit of conversation around, I know we, and I appreciate ESUCC submitting a petition underneath Rule 62, and we're going to kind of take that on to provide you know, answers where we can provide answers on rules and regulations, but really about how we're going to handle going into the next year around flexibilities around those rules and regs. And so, Craig, I'll turn it over to you for a bit of dialogue on that front. And Craig, I can only see you in the shadow, so.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute myself. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it, everybody. I know that there's some work that's going on behind the scenes, and Matt, maybe you can speak a little bit to it on the Rule 62 petition, coming up with a template. NCSA had sent out a survey, and I think the intent of that survey was to prioritize some of the things that we felt need to be addressed right away. I know that Rule 51 has federal involvement and requirements, but Rule 52, Rule 91, Rule 92 were towards the top of that. Attendance was another. And it seems like every question gives birth to at least a couple of more questions. So the timeline on that, we know that your board meets on June 8th. We know that there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes. If you could talk a little bit about that. We usually get 3 really strong themes, but we have kind of a smattering, and I don't want to overload you right away. I know things are going on behind the scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that decision-making process and timeline with Rule 62?
Yeah, in fact, I mean, what I didn't basically want to invite generally as we're working on the Rule 62 side of the equation, our staff is putting together essentially a template on what that answer looks like, vetting it with staff, and actually by the end of the week, I hope to have kind of at least an internal draft on that. One thing I'd tell you is, and I know I've talked already a little bit with Craig, so I'll share this with you. The reality is, if there's some kind of preferred approaches to it, we'd ask to kind of vet that through, and Craig and ESUs can kind of constantly be that path where we keep that dialogue going. But also, I think it's going to be important that some of the rules, and I know, like the bus driver rule, there's some things that we started to do to provide some flexibility on those fronts. If we come out with something on the order, and we'll have a process in place where we kind of have I'll call it a public draft or some version of a public draft, I'll want some additional feedback. I hope it answers most questions. I also know that the approach to answering that is it might answer the question in the given a particular circumstance, and we're probably going to run into more circumstances yet that we can't maybe plan for. So it'll kind of help us define how we'll take that on. I do anticipate that the draft will be out before the board meeting, and I'm not pulling up the right date in my head, but at the first Friday in June. We'll have that out there and have some continued dialogue. It might even be as soon as next week where we have some of that out there, and we can publicly talk through some of those things. I know also there was the survey from, I think it was through NCSA, with some of the highlights of areas of concern. Special ed is one of those that I know is a significant area of concern. In fact, I just got off a national call related to special ed needs. And again, I just want people to understand that even through the petition process and rulemaking process and all those different approaches, we still have to follow the law too. So especially the federal side, I think that's probably that one area that's going to be tougher to approach. But our intention all along is to provide flexibility to be able to work through that, and some process-oriented things that help us get to that flexibility. So Craig, do you have any? There's probably a couple more places.
I have a couple of other real quick ones
Sure.
that maybe you have an update on. The governor's executive order, we don't get a lot of this, and it's infrequent. This is supposed to end at the end of this month, if we understand it correctly. Do you know if he's going to extend that? Have you heard anything?
And when he's on, maybe we'll try to ask him that again. My understanding is yes, though. I think they're working on one for my discussions with Matt Milberger earlier today. So,
well, I can't specifically speak for school districts. I think it does benefit them to be able to meet. The ESUCC, we have 17 ESUs from Scottsbluff to Wakefield to Omaha and down to Auburn. And this executive order is really allowing us to meet regularly, talk about some of these issues, and then bring them forward. So we look forward to getting something from the governor on that. This was not a question, but I can see the Q&A. Shane Alexander is asking something. This was more of a comment that we had this week. With all the PPE being canceled on ESUCC, how can we protect our students and staff? I would just like to tell everybody that the products, the cleaning products, are are really hard to come by, but they seem to ebb and flow. So we watch them every hour, and when we can get them, we'll let you know. So Shane, that one's a shout out to you and a comment that I was going to make in my notes. So thanks for asking that question. And then we are getting a lot of questions about the upcoming school year, alternative learning, continuity of learning plans, modifications, and adjustments. And there's concern out there that if there's adjustments that have to be made in a policy manner, they have to be done by July. And so I think you've alluded to some of those answers and ambiguities, Dr. Bloomstead, but I guess I'll ask that question again, and maybe you can expound on it a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one hope, right, that we'll have quite a few of these things answered as we get to the end of May and into June. What I am trying to do through Launch Nebraska is really empower some of that local decision making. So that by the time folks are getting to July, we'll actually have a set of those plans. Now, I can't control all the conditions that might be taking place, obviously, from a public health perspective, but planning for all those different scenarios is going to be important for schools to be able to do. And so I think maybe even later in the presentation, we'll get to a little bit more of this as Dr. Epler and others talk a little bit more about the continuity of learning and kind of where we're going with those types of supports underneath Launch Nebraska. So, you know, as Craig and I have talked before, it's like I wish I had every answer for you on each of these fronts, but they are kind of evolving and changing as we go. But again, just appreciate the constant kind of dialogue and continuing conversation that we can have on those fronts. So. I just see a couple of questions. I'm going to transition slides, and I know the next part's going to be about conditions for learning, and there's maybe a couple of them, and Craig actually hit on one of them. Really those conditions for learning are about kind of the health and well-being of our, you know, certainly our students, our staff across the state. We'll take on the PPE thing, but I see a question from Bill McAllister about Launch Nebraska document having some issues around mental health supports too. So I think it might be good to bring in Lane, and Lane, you can kind of talk over a high level, and then Dr. Poor. Actually, I think we kind of have a few of these questions for to engage with you about, you know, what types of considerations schools should be planning for around health and safety in their buildings. So Lane, do you want to kick us off, and then Dr. Poor, thank you for joining us too.
You bet. Yeah. So thank you all very much for the communications that you've been sending our way and the very specific questions that have been really helpful. So if you recall last week, I spoke a little bit about kind of the two-phase approach of Launch Nebraska, and we're well into the second phase, which kind of getting to Bill McAllister's point in the question is really around, well, there's some weird things or some weird language maybe within Launch Nebraska that we don't say it that way, or we don't think about it that way. Just know that we're right in the middle of going through some of that language. So we have groups that are meeting to tackle some of that. Think through again then the specific pieces that need expounded upon. So know that that is coming. And keep your questions coming to me and through the commissioner. It's really helpful just to hear the things that you're speaking about. Paramount for us right now is really answering the questions that have been coming up about when do we know it's right to open, and what are the scenarios under which we could open. So I'm very thankful for Jack's leadership and a lot of the leaders in the MOAC area as well for reaching out and being willing to kind of take a stab at this at first. I also want you to know that we are well into a conversation with a national organization that is leading this conversation around the country and is going to help us really bring together all of those pieces as well. We have contracts in the work with UNMC, and we know that they're invaluable partners, as well as just leveraging the leaders in our local and state health departments to really help create these protocols, really help create this kind of decision matrix or risk matrix that helps us as local leaders know where we should really be turning. So know that that is in the works, and I do anticipate that, as the commissioner mentioned, that we're going to have more to share about that in early June is really our hope, meeting really quickly, putting together all of those pieces to help schools make those decisions. Again, knowing that things can change quite a bit over the summer. We want to just make sure that we have all of those tools, all of those pieces in place. So I think the word of the day is just give us time and take a small breath as we, you know, kind of put all of these different things together. And we just appreciate, again, your thought partnership and willingness to work with us. So with that, I want to stop and turn it over to Dr. Poor, who's our Douglas County Health Department leader, and just, again, another invaluable mind to all of this. And I had the opportunity to listen as Dr. Poor was speaking about this with some leaders earlier today. So Dr. Poor, what are some things that we should be thinking about as we have this conversation?
Well, good afternoon, first of all, to all of you, and glad to be here and glad to kind of brainstorm with you all. I think we are all in this phase where we are trying to learn from each other and try to make sure that we have the right plans in place, or going forward, at least with the right framework. And, you know, as I said on my previous call, there are different areas that you all need to think about, and I think every school is a little bit different. You're going to have framework and guidelines that are going to be broad, and then you are going to make them adjust and adapt to your situation. And so I really think there is, the Global Center for Health Security has nice pandemic recovery guide out that I sent out before I got on this call. So you may have that. It's very detailed, and it's for some of you, it may even be too detailed, but take from what you can the best and what fits your situation. I do think you're going to think about all of the engineering controls and policy and practices in regards to cleaning and so on. You're going to think about how you are going to serve lunch, and I think that's going to be a big one, because all of your schools are used to serve big buffet lunches and so on. I do think you may need to think differently. How can you serve box lunches, for example? I think then you need to start to think about masking and what all you need. And we talked earlier that potentially a list of those items that each school needs may be better presented to the Department of Education, who then can purchase in bulk. We talked a lot about how U.S. schools are going to think about vulnerable teachers and vulnerable students, and had some really good discussions about that. I do think it's going to be really important that if you have vulnerable students or vulnerable staff, that you are starting to think about how do you want to phase them in, and what is the responsibility of the individuals, where is their homeschooling and long distance learning. I think you're going to start to think as a school, you're going to start, how do you communicate with your local health department on a regular basis, so that you know when there are things that are coming up, that you are in the loop, and then you can share better communication with your parents and your teachers. I think there are going to be changes that we all make in our life as we go forward, and definitely the plans that you develop are going to have that prism of social distancing in mind. You're going to look through that lens, whatever you can do. That prism, the prism of what can we do with sanitizers. I talked a little bit about that before. You know, I read an article about a hospital this weekend, and the hospital did not have a single incident where workers were infecting the hospital setup. And you know why? Because they had very strict guidance on what nurses, what doctors did every day when they got into the hospital. And it was not only the temperature check, and we hear about that all the time, but it was also a symptom check. I don't know how feasible and how applicable that is going to be, but if you can do it, I always talk about in our cases, and we have now more than 2,000 of them, only 40% have high temperatures. So a temperature check is not really going to be the end all be all, but it is that check. Have you had a sniffle this morning? Are you coughing this morning? Are you extremely tired? Those symptoms actually should immediately bring the student and the teacher to a second checkpoint. Maybe the student nurse, who then is going to find out more about it. So the more you can help from bringing the virus into your school buildings, the better off you are. Then I think, of course, the next thing is to have protocols in place. What is going to happen when you have that one student or that one staff who is COVID positive? And how does that communication work with the local health department then? Because that is going to be, think about whooping cough. We already work with schools very closely when those situations arise. So that communication between the school nurse, the epidemiologist at the health department is even going to be tighter in these situations. We talked about the communication, and I have already brought it up, but we talked about, are there potential phases in your schools? Depending on what the situation is, are you only going to open up 50% of your school? Are you going to do a mix between lectures and distance learning? Those are all things that I think you as school professionals need to discuss amongst themselves. I think from the health departments, you should be expecting some information in regards to what does the virus look in the community? Where is it? What is the spread? Is the spread only related to clusters, or is the spread more widely in the community? And depending on that, I think there are going to be decisions that different school districts may need to make. So I do think that, you know, in June, potentially, all of you will be developing your plans, so to say. It will look different in each of the schools. It will look different depending on the level. Yes, so I just looking here, what should schools be considering to organize? Well, I do think PPE, cleaning supply, masks, thermometers, those are things that it's not too early. You see what we are running into with PPE at this time. We are short out of it. There are the quality that is changing now, and we have now getting some PPE where we are saying that is not acceptable. So the sooner you can put these orders in, I think the better you are. Other environmental consideration. Do you want to consider those shields that come up, those clear shields that we have now in our reception area? Should they be purchased between desks? I don't know, but I think it is something that you may want to consider together. You know, and how do you take care of the vulnerable student who has an underlying illness? Are you going to let that student come back to school? Or are you going to do long distance learning with that student? So those would be kind of some of the recommendations I would make for you.
So Dr. Poor, maybe kind of a question on, I'll call it a process question instead of putting you on the spot around specifics, but our anticipation with Launch Nebraska and with kind of providing guidance is to kind of run the big questions by public health officials across the board and use other folks to get you know, if we can answer them at scale as best possible, and then kind of have folks go, yeah, that's a really good approach, or that's not a good approach. Is that kind of how you would see this play out? You know that we do have different conditions across the state, but there's probably some general themes that everyone was going to want to address. And does that make sense as we continue the conversation with you?
Absolutely. I think there are themes that each and every school needs to address. And then there are some nuances to it, but I agree with you fully.
Well, we very much appreciate that. I see a question about, you know, that that we've adopted Launch Nebraska, and it's not so much adopted, but it framed it out to start this process. But there's like CDC has released new guidance, you know, and I know schools are looking for hopefully kind of one source of truth, so to say, relative to this. But as we look at different guidance and bring those together, that guidance probably isn't necessarily uniform. So maybe just as we're talking about it, folks are going to have to take guidance and then customize it for their individual schools and classrooms and circumstances. Is that pretty much how you would also see that, Dr. Port?
Yeah, I do. I think I haven't looked at the CDC reopening guidance. Is that specifically for school? But in general, it is very general. If you have seen those 6 pages now that has come out of the White House, where they kind of have whitewashed what CDC has recommended, they're very general. I actually looked at that yesterday for schools. You know, it's common sense. It's common sense. So I do not know in regards to, is the governor going to come out with some guidance? And that may be something that we could ask him. Is he going to address it in the DHM? Remember, schools closed before the first DHM came out. So you took some leadership at that time. So I'm not sure where he's going to go. I think he's deferring to you, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of been I think we're probably, in order to answer the complex questions we're going to have to answer, we'll provide as much guidance as we can from the state level. I mean, from the department, from working and try to take questions and get them organized in such a way that we can do that. I actually would be concerned if we got to very specific guidance coming from the state, because it might not meet the requirements or needs of local levels. So we are trying to look for kind of both a bottom up and top down approach that come together in a meaningful way. So at least that's where I hope we're going with this. So, hey, I want to go to the next slide, and Dr. Poore, you're welcome to, I think the next slide talks a little bit about, I know the NSAA provided some broad sense of weight rooms, and that came out just a week ago today. And again, this is kind of with very broad conditions. I know schools are probably trying to figure out whether or not this is appropriate or not. It's maintain social distance, kind of basic things, following guidelines around groups of 10 or less students. The notion that groups of 10 students should be kind of, well, they use the term predetermined, but essentially the same group of 10 students if they're coming in every day, to try to limit the interactions between students here at the beginning. You know, and not switching those different groups. But, you know, of all the different things you've heard so far, probably, and you've probably heard a lot of questions already on weight rooms, is there anything else you would add to the list that we ought to consider?
No, I think, I mean, those are, now the only thing is that you may want to ask the governor. I think he's starting to think, should that number 10 be changed starting on June 1. So I think that is a decision that he's still grappling with.
Okay. Yeah, that I haven't heard from him. So, well, I appreciate that. And I think everyone probably, or most folks, have at least seen that guidance that came out of NSAA. And so I just wanted to share that one more time. And I anticipate we'll try to tie these things into Launch Nebraska. Lane, do you have anything else kind of from the you know, conditions for learning side of the equation, or processes that you want folks to know or understand at this stage?
No, I just appreciate the conversation, and just know too that, again, more is coming. So any comments, concerns, questions that you have, send them my way, and we'll be definitely following up. There's also kind of two parts to the conditions for learning, Commish. The first one that was kind of thinking about those protocols and the safety, the facilities that Dr. Poor was speaking about. And then there's this next one that kind of leads into this, which is really about the whole child approach, kind of thinking about wellness from a little bit more holistic of a standpoint. So that kind of is a good transition here.
All right, so I'm going to invite Katie to join then for the conversation kind of around transition and to talk a little bit about food. And there's probably a lot more to talk about food, as Dr. Poor mentioned, just in the regular planning. So Katie, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I just wanted to share with everybody that the USDA issued 3 pretty important waivers to help schools continue to serve meals in safe ways, and those included extending a waiver for non-congregate meals through August 31st, 2020. And so we think that as schools are considering the way school will look in the fall, or once things get back started up in August, if they're doing kind of a hybrid type option where you have some students in the classroom some days and they alternate that with a different group or other half of the student population, that there is a way to be able to provide meals maybe 2 days at a time. So, they get meals for the days they're in school and then have some to take home with that non-congregate meal option. A couple of others that support that type of meal service would be the flexibility surrounding the requirements for meal service times, and those regulations have been waived through the end of August as well, in addition to parent or guardian pickup for meals. So we have pretty constant contact with our regional office. We tell them about some of the challenges and ideas that schools have for kind of facing and trying to problem solve those challenges. So we want to encourage you as superintendents and leaders at your schools to let us know what kinds of plans you're making and what kind of flexibilities would be helpful in helping implement those plans within the regulatory requirements of the programs. A couple of other things. I know our group is working hard to provide some good guidance for the Launch Nebraska piece of this. That's going to be nice resources for you. And I wanted to let you know that the Institute of Child Nutrition, which is housed at the University of Mississippi, is also working on making some nice resources surrounding meal service in classrooms and trying to get plans together that can help schools implement meal service in a way that utilizes the available flexibilities.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Katie, have we done anything on just the general serving side of the planning for fall? Have we done anything on that front yet? That was a good thought from Dr. Poor.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
So the safety in feeding, or in our normal kind of routines of providing lunchroom and
Sure.
Yeah, have we?
Yeah.
You had worked on that or not? So sorry to put you on the
right.
spot.
No, that's okay. Yeah. Well, we offered an initial kind of like safe food handling, safe food service practices webinar to all schools that are utilizing the summer food service program to continue to provide meals at this time or even throughout the summer. That was offered by Christy Berger a couple of weeks ago. And that webinar was recorded for your reference. And you all could find that at the Nutrition Services website, on the NDE Nutrition Services website. And we anticipate continuing to offer opportunities for learning and idea sharing specifically surrounding this, because we understand that there's lots of opportunity to share best practices surrounding this based on kind of what schools have learned through their experience serving this spring and then into the summertime.
All right. Well, thank you, Katie. I think we'll go ahead and proceed to the next part, which I think hits us for continuity of learning, and I'll welcome I think Corey Epler and Shirley Vargas to kind of give a little bit of update on this front. So thanks. Addie, do you have to go?
And I say no, goodbye.
All right.
Everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Poor.
Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just a few things I would hit on and echo the sentiment of my colleagues as we think about the timing of the support. So one thing that we're really focusing on and continue to work on is the supports around summer learning. And I just did want to highlight the series of 10 webinars that we kicked off last week. We had over 450 folks on the first webinar specifically on unfinished learning and instructional equity. This week, we're going to talk about unfinished learning in mathematics, and the hope would be tomorrow to cue folks up to start thinking about what unfinished learning in mathematics might look like as we look towards the fall, and then on Thursday, really identifying a specific resource that schools might want to leverage in the summer space to continue facilitating learning as it relates to mathematics, understanding that many schools are in different places as they finish out the school year. So registration is still open for all of the webinars. Folks are welcome to sign up, send it out to your department heads, your lead teachers, your administrators, your principal coaches, etc. Certainly a great resource. One of the things as we continue to build out Launch Nebraska, specifically under the continuity of learning piece, is the supports for learning. And so over the next few weeks, myself along with my team are working to build out specific resources around essential grade level content for literacy and mathematics, as well as how we leverage assessment and instruction materials in this time, but also professional learning supports for educators as we think about what fall might look like. And within that too, continuing to wrap around the need and the notion of social emotional learning supports as well. So I would say over the next specifically 2 to 3 weeks that we're gonna have a tremendous amount of resources that districts would be able to modify for their context as they're thinking about multiple scenarios for the fall. So I know that a lot of folks want that information now, and I'll just again ask for patience as we work to build that out over the course of the next several weeks. So we hope that guidance will be available. I'll stop there and kick it over to Dr. Vargas.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to just briefly talk to you about some school and district supports that are coming. So as Corey has mentioned, a lot of the professional learning series, goes through June, and we want to think about some of the plans we had in place pre-pandemic and what does it look like to repurpose some of those opportunities so that we can have more responsive and appropriate professional learning sessions for the next school year. So starting in the fall through 2021. And some of those things, start with Launch Nebraska and the professional learning series that Corey has mentioned, and really thinking about how do we bring both the need to not compromise the instructional integrity that many of our students need based on the identifications that we know that our schools had as a result of the last accountability cycle, to also the need for ensuring public health and public safety, so that they both come together and that we're making comprehensive decisions with multiple voices at the table. As such, we reviewed all of the continuity of learning plans that were submitted back at the end of March, and really seeing how we can establish a deeper understanding of what our districts were able to do in such a quick timeline, and the systems that are still necessary to put in place so that we're addressing the various needs that are coming up. So it's really important that we're leveraging these different partners that we have, and they also, are asking us for patience as we're requiring them to think just as fast as many of you are requiring us to think, because we want to make sure we're providing the most meaningful and beneficial information in front of you that has been vetted by those that need to vet that information. So we're looking at what year-long professional learning communities can look like based on the identification of your schools. For example, students with disabilities, English learners, and students that are economically disadvantaged, all the while understanding that race and ethnicity plays a major role in those intersections as well. And then also thinking about what are comprehensive supports. So again, marrying the public health and safety with the decision around what instruction will look like beyond the summer into the fall. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Corey and Shirley. Appreciate the efforts. I think I saw a question pop up about, first of all, the professional development side is being recorded and will be available. And I don't know exactly, I assume in essentially the same location. and we'll kind of continue to build on that. I think there'll be other resources, and we'll use that Launch Nebraska site as another place to kind of contain some of those educational resources and continue to build that. And obviously, appreciate everybody's engagement on those fronts. I'm going to jump to the CARES Act, and we got about 10 minutes left, and I still haven't seen that the governor's been able to join, and I'm watching my phone too, just in case. But if he doesn't join, I see some questions in the question and answer that are probably best for him. There are a couple things about whether or not the department has any particular stance, kind of legal advice things. And we'll, by the way, if you write a question in here, and we'll try to be able to answer it. If I can't answer it in this setting, we'll be able to review that as we go. So the governor just texted me and said he's still on a call with the White House. So anyway, so I don't know if he will be able to join us. So one of the other things around the CARES Act is it's kind of has two folds. I mean, one is the fact that we have obviously the portion that's kind of controlled by the department, or at least the application that we'll submit, and then the portion that the governor will submit. And so we have some meetings coming up on those fronts. But I'm going to turn it over to Brian Halstead to kind of give a rundown of our current efforts. And Brian, are you there?
I'm here, Commissioner. As everybody can see from the screen, the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, is a portion which the department, through the commissioner, will be applying for by May 22nd. The allotment to Nebraska is about 65 million and a few $100,000. You can see the breakouts. As the commissioners indicated before, we are going to reserve 10% at the state level for some statewide initiatives, which means there's just under 59 million that will go out to public school districts. If you got Title I funding this year and you took it, you'll get CARES funding once we make our application. You are required to also provide equitable services to non-public school students with the allocation of the ESSER funds that the commissioner will be applying for. These funds are designed for prevention, preparation for, and a response to COVID-19. I know I've heard numerous people say this is like ARA, and I will tell you that's not what the CARES Act is. That's not what it's intended for. And if many of you asked in previous meetings, wait a minute, I see this survey the department put out, what's that mean? Well, that's why Shirley Vargas is going to pop in to tell you what we found out from the 5,000 responses we got back from educators, school board members, and community members. Shirley.
So much, Brian. Thanks. So like Brian mentioned, the survey was out for almost 2 weeks, and it was really around getting public input around what our public has to say around their needs for their community. And it's really to help direct our 10%, but also to provide our leanings for local school districts to understand kind of like where we are in relation to the needs that we're seeing at a state level. And as you see on the slide here, these are the top 5 areas that were identified from nearly 5,000 respondents. Enhancing technology infrastructure, supports for possible interruptions, which we're currently engaging in as we speak for many of these, right? The third, ensuring nutritional needs are met for our students, providing professional learning for inclusive remote learning environments, underlining, right, underscoring the best practices for different student groups. And then lastly, creating or expanding mental, behavioral, and social emotional support. So as Lane and others have mentioned throughout this call, many of these things are in the works, and they will be enhanced on our Launch Nebraska webpage so that you'll be able to not only engage in those resources, but think differently about the ways we've been engaging in this work. And Dean's actually going to talk a little bit more in depth around the technological infrastructure.
Well, thanks, Shirley. So hopefully, for those that have been tracking all of the different pieces of Launch Nebraska that have been presented, we continue to have a similar mantra in that the next couple of weeks, we will have a lot more pieces that are more Nebraska-based and connected based upon the needs and priorities that have been identified. Underneath the planning piece is the technology side of this. And so as you just heard from the results, the top two items, which include the technology, as well as the supports for planning interruptions, which can in many ways come back to some of those particular resources. And so one of the things that I wanted to share briefly, and some of you may have seen this, but we've, in the technology conversation, have been focusing on what we're characterizing as the hierarchy of digital needs. And so the key elements of broadband or infrastructure and being able to connect to the internet, ensuring that there's a device that's connected to that system, and then the software systems that are consistent and provided as a part of that, in addition to the high quality digital content and the training that's wrapped around all of that. And then not forgetting, of course, about the privacy and security that's tied into all of those particular pieces. And so we've had a group of partners from Network Nebraska to the ESUs to private industry partners, community foundations, others, all working together to think through how is it that we could best leverage and prioritize some of those resources from the CARES Act, and also leverage the potential buying power, if you will, from a statewide perspective in negotiating some options. And so over the next couple of weeks, we look forward to providing some options for districts as we think about the preparation of summer and into the fall. And we try to find ways to support the possible interruptions through ensuring equitable access to technology and the resources surrounding that. So stay tuned to the Launch Nebraska site for more additional resources associated in that area.
One thing I would additionally highlight, I mean, we're also trying to work with the governor on this particular front around where he might spend funds across this. And I would kind of anticipate that the governor's interest areas are around infrastructure. I don't know so much about devices, but software systems and digital content have been areas in which he's expressed some interest. So we're trying to leverage the funds that we might all have kind of collectively to make sure that we can do that and do that well. One of the, this includes, yes, some considerations of a statewide rollout of an LMS, the kind of key underlying systems for digital delivery. Not that everyone would have to use those things, but would hopefully be in a position where we could get to use those things and scale up some of that work. And so those are things in the ongoing efforts on that front. I would anticipate trying to also assist and further assist schools in that kind of professional development. There's several different areas and angles I think that we're going to need, including just training folks around the health and safety and well-being. I know some of the conversations around kind of mental health first aid has been part of the things that we might have. So there's professional development and supports that I could imagine trying to leverage across a lot of different sectors. And so I just wanted to share that with you as well. So thanks to everyone for their presentations. I know this kind of pulls us into the conclusion here. And again, I don't anticipate the governor is able to join us, but I'm going to look just as we have a minute or two here to see if there's anything I might be able to address, or at least know the question is there. One question up here is talking about the governor announced in Colorado that they're opening all their schools this coming school year. And I don't know about the details of what went into that Colorado conversation. I will tell you that I think the place to start is the notion that, hey, look, we're going to open schools in the fall. We just have to be prepared for the types of scenarios that we're going to face, I think, as Dr. Poore said. And so a lot of different protocols and a lot of different work yet to do, obviously. There was a couple different questions, I think, on PPE and sanitizer. That is actually one more angle. And Craig, I know you talked about it from the kind of co-op purchasing side. We've had conversations also with the with others in state purchasing around just purchasing a lot of different things. And so it might be an angle that we can continue to talk about just to try to leverage buying power. And mostly in this case, just getting ourselves to have a big enough order to get folks' attention, as everyone in the world quite literally is trying to order such things. So I appreciate that. And I do think that some of that bulk buying hopefully can help us on that front. A question around whether COVID testing is going to be possible or part of the solution. I was on conversation with some of our post-secondary partners. I don't think we can count on regular testing of all populations to be ready for the fall. And so I think, as Dr. Poore pointed out, what are the other screenings that are going to be important for that? And again, we'll kind of keep these questions on our queue for the future. Somebody asked about the type of masks that we ought to be considering. And I truly had a conversation with Dr. Ali Khan from UNMC, and I asked him that very same question, and he basically said, well, it's probably just cloth masks, right, in the sense of trying to protect others from that contagion. And so there's a couple things about legislation that I'll have to defer, but I think it's this notion around compulsory attendance and how we're going to manage that as we go forward. Those are questions that are already in front of us at the department and trying to work on those fronts. Another question around just kind of the risk mitigation with what school attorneys might be saying around having documents signed by folks assuming certain levels of risk when they come into the school settings. And I think those are all very good conversations to continue to have. I don't know that I have any particular, well, as a non-attorney, I won't try to answer that, but I do think it's a topic that we're going to see more and more of. So, and I think that probably goes not just for students, but also with staff and how that's going to play out. So a lot of work yet to do. I really do appreciate your attention to this. I appreciate folks kind of working together as school districts to kind of provide that. Lane and our team will be constantly trying to check in. I think we actually have NDE staff people participating in each of the regional meetings. And so if there's things that pop up and, things to draw the attention to for the department, we'll do that. We'll continue to work with the governor as closely as possible. Just to kind of close out, just a reminder that this week I do think we'll have some additional summer learning guidance, some additional summer graduation conversations and guidance, and again, the continued effort for figuring out where the CARES Act dollars go, and we'll get those applications out and figure out some of those process pieces too. So I appreciate very much everyone's attention. I will certainly talk to or see you. I guess it's 2 weeks away, but we'll find some other ways to communicate if we need to in the meantime. So appreciate it. Take care. Have a great week, and congratulations to your 2020 grads. I have one myself at home, so appreciate the challenges that we all face on that front. So take care, everybody, and thanks to all the panelists, Jack and Craig, and all my team that were on. So thanks.